They say the ocean remembers what we forget. It does not keep track of time in years or minutes, but in the weight of what we never said. It remembers in pressure, in pull, in the way your feet sink into the sand when you stand too still. Every wave is a breath withheld, every tide a question asked in a language too old for words. Some places are known for beauty, others for ruin, but there are places, hidden, quiet, found mostly by accident or desperation, where the sea becomes something else entirely, a listener. And if you speak aloud in such a place, even if you think no one is around, something will answer. This is the story of such a place, and of someone who went there thinking she had nothing left to say. Her name is Mara, a woman frayed at the edges, burned out, half-written. She boarded a nameless bus heading toward a town that should not exist, one without clocks, without boats, without reason, a place called Sea Cleft. She wasn't chasing peace, she was escaping noise, but the ocean there didn't offer silence, it offered remembrance. Mara came to write, to forget, but the shoreline had its own story to tell. It began with a whisper, soft, almost kind, a voice she had not heard in years. Closer, it said. She should have turned back. Everyone does the first time. But some people, some truths, cannot help but step into the tide. And that's when it began. The unmaking, the remembering. She saw things that had been buried in the undertow of her own mind. A face behind a windshield, a shell spinning where a heart should be, a city of salt beneath the waves, and a door that opened not into rooms, but into grief, layered and patient, ancient and personal. What the ocean showed her was not horror, not exactly. It was truth, the kind of truth we lock behind our ribs and convince ourselves we've outgrown, the kind of truth that whispers even when we sleep. And slowly the sea asked something of her, not with force but with inevitability. It asked her to remember, to confess, to descend, to return. This story is not about monsters in the deep, though there are shapes that slither and blink in places light should never reach. It is not about hauntings, though ghosts do appear, if only in mirrors. It is not about death. It is about what we carry with us long after the dying ends. It's about the things we bury, inside ourselves, inside others. The things we hide behind long drives, unread messages, polite silences, and overworked days. It's about how the sea does not forgive. It does not forget. But sometimes, if you listen, if you truly hear, it lets you speak back. Mara's story is one of return, of walking back through the tide and into the memory that made her. And what she finds is not punishment, not salvation, but something in between. Something as soft and cruel as a lullaby, as warm and merciless as sunset, as honest as salt. This is a story about love twisted by time, about guilt not as a sentence but as an anchor, about how we drown long before we stop breathing, and how sometimes the only way out is through. So if you've ever stood by the water at dusk, listening to nothing and hearing too much, this story is for you. If you've ever lost someone and didn't know if you were grieving them or grieving the version of you that existed when they were still alive, this story is for you. If you've ever wished you could forget and feared what might return if you did, then listen, because the tide is coming in, and it knows your name. They say the ocean speaks at sunset, not in waves or wind, but in whispers, low, deliberate, and just barely louder than your breath if you're standing alone at the shoreline, with the sun half drowned in the horizon. Locals know not to listen, not too closely, not too long, just enough to hear the hush of foam and turn back before the tide changes its mind. But Mara was not a local. She arrived on a bus that didn't have a number, just a flaking sign that read Sea Cleft, last stop. The driver didn't speak. The door hissed open, and Mara stepped into salt-thick air that seemed to press against her thoughts like a damp cloth. She had a week, 7 days to write something that might save her job, her name, her dignity. The editor hadn't said those things aloud, but she heard it between the lines of his email. Get out of the city, clear your head, come back when your stories stop bleeding. So she came to Sea Cleft, a fishing town with no boats, a population of 208, if the welcome sign could be believed, and a silence that clung like barnacles. The innkeeper was pale, and his smile came a second too late. The walls of her rented cottage curved slightly inward, as though the house was used to storms and still flinched at calm. It was on the third evening that she heard it, the whisper. She was barefoot in the sand, the sky sliced orange and purple, the tide curling like a breathing lung. The sound reached her, not from behind, not around, but within the space in front of her, like words exhaled between wave and air. Closer. She froze. There was no one on the beach, no breeze. The water was glass, catching the last gasp of sun in its mirrored throat. She stepped forward, only once, and it whispered again. We've been waiting. She left after that, didn't run, didn't panic, but her skin prickled in places she didn't know could feel fear. And when she closed the door to the cottage behind her, the hinges let out a sigh like a held breath escaping. She didn't sleep well. Her dreams were full of colors that didn't exist, of hands made of coral and fishbone tapping gently on her window. The next day, the town was different, not visibly, just off. The cafe chairs had been rearranged. The lighthouse no longer blinked. A gull hovered mid-flight, longer than gravity should allow. And when she passed the newsstand, the top headline read, Local woman returns to the shoreline. Tide expects her. No paper below it, just the headline. Mara. The whisper slid across the surface of the water like an oar through ink. She stood ankle-deep now, shoes abandoned on the sand behind her, her toes slowly sinking into the cold grit. The waves didn't crash, they leaned, touched her legs with reverent patience, like they had all the time in the world. The sky was nearly gone, just a red band now, bleeding into purple-black. No stars yet, no moon, no sound except the breath of the ocean. And the voice, you remember. She didn't speak, because she did, not clearly, not in detail, but somewhere beneath the excuses and sleepless nights and broken wine glasses and half-sent messages, she remembered. The cold metal of the car, the streetlight turning green, the way his laugh had cracked when he called her name, before the crunch of... Mara's knees buckled. The water caught her, didn't resist, didn't drag. Just held her. You brought him here. She didn't ask how it knew. She didn't need to. Because when the ocean whispers at sunset, it doesn't ask. It reminds. Behind her, the beach was no longer empty. Not quite. Figures stood in the sand, still, unmoving. Shadows shaped like people, featureless, watching. One lifted its hand, waved. A child's silhouette. She turned sharply, too fast. The water lapped at her mouth. The salt tasted wrong, not briny, not natural. It tasted like sleep, and something underneath it. Come deeper. The voice was no longer soft. It had weight now, command. It pressed against her spine, not forcing, not pulling, but expecting. The water rose, faster than it should have. Knees, waist, chest. The tide was wrong. The tide was listening. Mara turned back to the shore. Gone. The beach, the cottage lights, the sky, gone. In their place, dark, but not empty. Something blinked in the deep, then another. Eyes. Dozens. Watching. One closer than the rest. Too close. Mara tried to breathe, found she no longer needed to. Not here. Not anymore. He waits below. Her voice returned, not in her throat, but in her thoughts. Eli? The eyes vanished, replaced by a door, not real, not wooden. A door made of coral and sea glass and netting pulled from the bones of ships. It pulsed like a wound. Step through. Her hands moved without her. The door opened without sound. And on the other side, Eli, or what was left of him. He smiled without lips. His hair floated like a crown of kelp. His chest was hollow, and inside it spun a shell like a heart. His eyes were wrong, but he knew her. You finally came. Mara stepped through the door. The sea didn't push back. It welcomed. The space beyond was not a room, nor a cave. It was a memory drowned in salt and stretched into eternity. A hallway lined with air bubbles that reflected her life, frame by aching frame. She saw herself at age 8, letting a crab pinch her finger just to feel something. At 16, standing alone on a pier, watching fireworks that never exploded. And then, Eli. In every bubble, laughing, talking, bleeding. In one, he offered her a cigarette. In another, he wept in a bathtub full of his father's whiskey. In another, he reached for her through the windshield before the world turned into white noise and shattered glass. Each version cracked as she passed, the surface of each bubble spidering outward like ice underfoot, until the memories burst silently behind her. Eli floated in the center of it all, hands folded like a priest, his smile a stitch of calm sewn into too tight skin. You were always going to come here. His voice didn't ripple the water. It grew in it, like coral, like mold. Mara felt her throat tighten. You're not him. No, he said, but I remember him perfectly. His body drifted forward, feet never moving. You tried to forget, but forgetting doesn't work here. Around them, the sea began to pulse with a heartbeat not her own. Boom, pause, boom. A rhythm like grief, like footsteps following her down a hallway she'd never walked. The hallway began to narrow, the light dimmed, and the ocean whispered again, not from a single voice this time, but from every angle, every molecule, every ghost that had ever touched water. Confess. She closed her eyes and saw it. Not just the accident, not just the blood and sirens and the hollow sound his skull made against the passenger window, but the seconds after. The silence she sat in, the way she touched his shoulder and felt nothing. No scream, no tears, only relief, because now he couldn't leave her first. Eli tilted his head. There it is. The water constricted around her like a noose tightening. She choked, not on salt, on truth. Do you think grief is payment? He asked. Do you think it ends the debt? His hollow chest began to spin, the shell inside grinding against his ribs. The entire ocean responded. Boom, boom, boom. And then, from deep in the blackness below, It rose slowly, not out of haste, not out of hunger, out of certainty. From beneath the horizonless black, past the bones of whales and rusted anchors, it came. A shape too large for eyes to hold, too old to move quickly. It dragged the ocean with it, pulling reality like silk across barnacled teeth. Its body coiled without end. Its scales were not flesh, but reflections, shining with the memories of every soul that had drowned with secrets in their lungs. Mara couldn't breathe now, not because the water pressed against her lungs, but because her guilt did. The weight of it soaked into her bones like seawater into stone. And Eli? Eli watched with a calm not born of peace, but surrender. You could have stayed. You could have died with me. His face was no longer familiar. It flickered like a poorly tuned channel, mouth twitching between smiles and sobs, his voice layered, echoing with the whispers of every name the sea had swallowed. But you left, and now we remember. The thing below opened something that could not be called a mouth, and the whispers poured from it in thousands of voices. You made us, you made us, you made us. Mara tried to move, but the water had turned viscous, heavy, like honey and ink and teeth. The door behind her, the coral-wound arch that had led here, was gone. Only depth remained, and the sea said, "You're ready." Suddenly, everything snapped. The hallway of memories shattered like glass, and Mara was falling. No, not falling, being rewound. The ocean pulled her backward, not toward escape, but to a beginning, to the moment before. She landed on sand, soft, warm, red with sunset. Her breath rushed back in. She was kneeling at the edge of the water, palms pressed into the shore. It was day 1. The beach was empty, the water calm, her shoes beside her, and from the cliffs above, she could see it, the bus. It hadn't left yet. And on the sand, a few feet away, the slip of newspaper fluttered in the breeze. Same headline. Local woman returns to the shoreline. Tide expects her. She picked it up. The back had changed. A note in her own handwriting. You won't escape until you confess it out loud. And mean it. The whisper came again, gentle now, familiar. One more chance, Mara. Behind her, the tide began to rise. The sand burned under Mara's knees, not from heat, but from memory. As the tide curled around her ankles, the water shimmered with 1,000 things she hadn't said. Words she had buried in the soft spaces of her mind and labeled regret, without ever opening the box. She gripped the newspaper in her hand until it turned to pulp. The ink bled into her palm, the letters rearranged as they melted, reforming one final message. If you lie again, we'll take your mouth next. The ocean doesn't ask for answers, it asks for the truth. She rose to her feet. The shoreline was empty, but she felt the audience watching, just beyond the haze of sunset, the shapes, the witnesses, the other dreamers caught in tides of their own making. One more chance, the voice had said. Her voice broke when she finally used it. I left him, she said, her throat raw. Not in the car. Before that. I left him months ago, in my mind. I just never told him. The water stilled. She took a step in. The tide rose to her calves. I knew he was breaking, she said. He needed someone, but she swallowed hard. I didn't want to be the one to carry him anymore. The horizon flickered, and from the far distance, something moved beneath the waves. Not the vast creature, not the chorus of drowned regrets. Just Eli. He stood ankle deep across the water, facing her. Whole. Alive. Sunlight catching in his hair, the version of him that existed in every picture she kept in boxes under her bed. The version before the spiral, before the bruises, before the silences. But his eyes held the depth of the ocean, and he spoke. Then say it. Her lips trembled. I let you die. The wind dropped. The sea pulled back just a little. I could have pulled you out, or stayed, or screamed, but I didn't. The air filled with the sound of something exhaling, like a storm choosing not to arrive. Eli stepped closer. His bare feet didn't disturb the water. Thank you, he said, and he began to dissolve. Not melt, not vanish. He scattered. Like sand caught in sunlight, his form blew away into the salt air. Pieces of him floating upward instead of down, drifting into the glowing band of the sun. The sea calmed. The sky softened. Mara dropped to her knees. The waves kissed her wrists, gentle. For the desert breathed. That was the first thing Mara noticed, as the last shimmer of ocean folded into heat. She stood on a shore that no longer existed, staring out across a plain of white salt that stretched into nothing. No clouds, no sun, just a sky of static gray like the TV fuzz between dreams. She turned back to where the bus had been. Gone. No cliff, no road, no familiar anything. Only salt. And in the center of the sky, where the sun should have been, was a hole. Round and black, a pupil in a blind eye. And it blinked. She walked, not because she chose to, but because there was nothing else to do. Her feet crunched with each step, tiny fractures spidering out behind her like the desert didn't want to hold her weight. After the 5th mile, the landscape began to change. Not forward, beneath. The salt began to rise in delicate shapes, spires, ribs, branches of crystal. She didn't notice the pattern until she'd already crossed its threshold. The ground beneath her was no longer solid. It was sculpted. Tiles made of compressed shell and coral bone. The remains of something vast and religious. She stood at the gates of the Salt Cathedral. Its spires grew up from the ground in impossible angles, threading into the gray sky like needles sewing a wound. No doors, no guards, no welcome. But it was open. It had always been open. The whisper followed her here. You confessed. Now you must remember. Inside it was enormous. A vaulted hollow that defied physics. The walls shimmered with inscriptions, not carved, but grown. Salt veins twisted into letters in no language she knew, but every phrase carried weight, like meaning had sunk into her body without consent. And at the center of the cathedral was the altar, a pool, still, clear, circular, perfectly round, like a pupil, or a lens, or a mouth. She stepped toward it. Her reflection did not follow. Instead, the pool showed a room, familiar, her old apartment, a flickering lamp, that awful green chair, a pair of shoes kicked half under the coffee table, and the couch, Eli asleep on it, alive, real, breathing. She staggered back. The pool did not ripple. You left more than guilt, the whisper said. You left yourself. Her own voice echoed from nowhere. If I could go back, would you? The sea asked. Yes. The cathedral exhaled. Cracks spidered across the floor. The pool deepened, and without waiting, without thinking, Mara stepped in. There was no splash, no fall, only gravity turning sideways. She opened her eyes. She was on the couch, back in the apartment breathed around her. Stale air thick with unsaid words. Eli sat on the worn couch, his eyes holding shadows Mara couldn't quite reach. He looked alive, too alive for this place that was neither memory nor present. "You came back," he said softly, voice threading through the silence. She swallowed. The weight of the ocean settled in her chest. "I have to." Outside the window, the sky rippled, the same black pupil from the salt cathedral, blinking slow and wide. "The Watcher," Mara whispered. Eli nodded, eyes distant. "It sees everything we try to hide." The whisper returned, not a sound, but a feeling curling in the corners of her mind. "Remember what you left behind, what you buried, what you never dared say." Her hands trembled. "I don't know if I'm ready." "You don't have to be. Just honest." The walls around them blurred, folding and twisting until Mara was kneeling again at the edge of the cathedral's altar pool. Her reflection shimmered, fragmented, fading, until the surface revealed a new image. A cracked photo of her younger self, smiling but alone. A silver key slipped from the corner of the picture, sinking silently into the water's depths. "The key to forgetting," the whisper said, low and relentless. Mara's breath caught. The ocean's memory was vast, but so was its patience. If she dared unlock the past, maybe, just maybe, she could finally begin to forgive. The cathedral pulsed, salt crystals humming with light and shadow. Her journey was far from over. The silence after the whisper was heavy, filled with the weight of things unspoken. Mara knelt by the pool, the surface still as glass, the key lost in the depths below. Her fingers hovered just above the water, the chill seeping into her skin like a warning. The apartment, her memory, flickered again, briefly pulling her back into that room with Eli, before the cathedral's shadows reclaimed her. "Unlock it," the voice murmured. "Unlock what you refuse to see." Her breath hitched, thoughts swirling like the tide. She'd locked away more than guilt, more than pain. She'd locked away herself, fragments scattered in the crevices of forgotten days and sleepless nights. The key wasn't just a token, it was a promise, a door to what she had buried. Mara dipped her hand beneath the water's surface. Cold, dark, endless. Her fingertips brushed something hard, smooth and cold. The key. She gripped it tightly, feeling the weight settle deep in her palm. The pool began to ripple. Images surfaced, faces, places, moments she'd never allowed herself to remember. A broken promise whispered between two people on a cold winter night. A laugh that turned hollow, a touch that never healed. The cathedral pulsed in response, walls trembling as salt shards shimmered. "Face it," the ocean breathed, and in that moment, Mara realized the tide was not only waiting for her truth, but for her courage to finally embrace it. The water's edge blurred, the line between memory and reality fading. She stood slowly, key clenched like a lifeline. The whisper came again, soft but sure. "This is only the beginning." The salt cathedral's silence was a living thing, heavy, expectant, wrapped around Mara like the weight of the sea itself. The pool at its center shimmered beneath the soft glow of the salt crystals, but the surface was no longer calm. It rippled with the memories she'd just unlocked, images swirling in fractured waves. Mara held the key tight, her knuckles white, the coldness of the metal biting into her palm as if warning her to stop. But she couldn't. Not now. A voice echoed, not from the whisper, but from the space around her. It was deeper, layered, almost like the cathedral itself was speaking. Every secret has a price. She swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the watery reflection where her younger self appeared, flickering between smiles and tears. Behind that fragile girl were shadows, the people she'd loved and lost, the moments she'd wished away. Mara stepped closer to the pool. The key pulsed softly, as if alive. With a breath that felt like drowning, she plunged her hand beneath the surface. The water was colder than anything she'd ever felt. Not just cold, but sharp, slicing through the layers of her soul. Her fingers brushed the smooth edge of a submerged door. The coral and salt of the salt cathedral twisted and reformed around it, a threshold that beckoned her forward. The whisper returned, this time a command. Step through. Mara hesitated, heart hammering like a storm. But the ocean waits for no one. She grasped the key, fitting it into the lock carved of coral and bone. A deep groan echoed through the cathedral as the door slowly creaked open, spilling light and shadow like blood. Stepping through was like falling, or waking from a dream that was not her own. She found herself standing on a rocky shore beneath a bruised sky, the air thick with salt and something older, sorrow, maybe, or regret. Before her, the sea churned, wild and endless, and waiting in the waves was a figure, not Eli, but someone older, something ancient. Its eyes were endless depths, black as the space beneath the ocean's darkest trenches. Tentacles of seaweed and shadow swirled around it like a crown. It spoke, a voice both many and one, rippling like the tide itself. You have come far, Mara. The wind carried its words, whispering through the crashing waves. Every memory is a thread, every truth a tide. You hold the key to unravel what was lost. Mara's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet were rooted. Who are you? She asked, voice trembling. We are the sea's memory, it said. The water embraced Mara like a cold shroud, pulling her deeper into a world where light fractured and twisted in strange currents. The shell in her hand pulsed with a heartbeat not her own, syncing with the rhythm of the ocean's endless breath. Around her, the sea shimmered with faces, ghostly, flickering, each a fragment of memory, a shard of loss. She swam without effort, her body moving through the currents as if the water itself guided her. The ancient figure lingered nearby, silent but watchful, its endless eyes reflecting the vastness of forgotten sorrow. Ahead, a cavern opened beneath the waves, an abyss of shadows and broken echoes. The scent of salt and decay thickened, and Mara felt the weight of all the stories buried in this place pressing down on her chest. Inside, the walls were alive with memories, carved not in stone, but in light and darkness. Whispers wove through the air like tangled seaweed, voices half heard and half remembered. She saw Eli again, whole, fragile, human, in moments stolen from a past she'd tried to forget. She saw the arguments, the silences, the sudden fractures that had widened between them like cracks in the ice. And then, the accident. Not just the crash, but what came after. The unbearable stillness, the guilt that had crept in like a slow tide. The sea whispered, its voice a chorus of sorrow and longing. You could not save him. Mara's throat tightened. I didn't know how. The cavern darkened. A new figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, her eyes filled with the same pain Mara carried, her hands reaching out as if to hold something lost. You are not alone in this, the figure said. We all carry the weight of what we leave behind. Mara's breath caught. The woman's face was familiar. Herself, years ago, before the fractures, before the silence. The past and present blurred. I am ready, Mara whispered. The shell in her hand flared, and the cavern brightened with the soft glow of forgiveness. The ocean's memory softened its endless chant. You have faced the depths. Now you must rise. A current lifted Mara, carrying her upward, away from the shadows and toward the surface. As she broke through the water, the salt cathedral reformed around her, salt spires gleaming like stars against the gray sky. The ancient figure watched silently, its eyes deep. The salt-cracked earth beneath Mara's feet felt impossibly dry after the cold embrace of the ocean. Each step stirred tiny clouds of dust, fragile as forgotten promises, drifting into the vast gray sky. The pupil in the sky, the blind eye, watched silently, a void that swallowed sound and light. She clutched the key tighter, its warmth a fragile tether to what she had uncovered beneath the waves. The salt cathedral spires loomed behind her, sharp and crystalline, catching the faintest flicker of fading light. Ahead, the horizon shimmered, not with water, but with heat and mirage. The desert stretched endlessly, an ocean of salt and sand, but Mara knew it was something else entirely, a place where memories were both preserved and devoured, a crucible for forgotten truths. The whisper returned, softer now, as if tired of urging. The tide moves forward, but the sea remembers all. Your path leads to where water forgets, and something else remembers. Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to ask what that meant, but the silence that followed was its own answer. She walked toward the shimmering horizon, each step heavier, the weight of confession and remembrance settling deep into her bones. As the desert heat rose in waves, shapes began to emerge, figures made of salt and shadow, faces from the memories she'd barely survived. They watched her, still and patient, waiting for her to cross the threshold. Then the ground beneath her cracked open, a jagged maw glowing with an eerie blue light. Without hesitation, Mara descended. The air grew colder, denser, filled with the scent of brine and decay. Below the salt flats, an underground cathedral unfolded, vast, dark, and dripping with stalactites that gleamed like icicles made of obsidian and salt. Here, the water had receded, but had not vanished. It pooled in vast, black mirrors, reflecting not stars, but fractured fragments of lost souls. Mara's reflection fractured as well, splitting into pieces across the dark surface. And in that darkness, a voice waited. Not gentle, not coaxing, cold, certain. You've wandered far, Mara. The voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. You've carried the tide inside you. But what will you do when the sea forgets? The chamber breathed. It was not lungs that moved the air, but pressure. Ancient, slow, shifting like tectonic plates beneath the sea. The walls glistened with threads of salt, stretched into veins that pulsed faintly, alive with memory. Mara stood at the edge of the black mirror pool, her reflection fractured into 3 pieces: past, present, and something that hadn't happened yet. "You've carried the tide inside you," the voice repeated, closer now. She turned. Nothing. Only the salt columns that stretched into forever, their edges flickering like mirages. She faced the mirror again. The third reflection, the one from the future, moved. It did not mimic, it watched, and then it spoke. "You've brought it too far," it said, in her own voice, only older, raw, threadbare. "The ocean forgave you, the tide released you, but this place..." Mara's throat went dry. "This place forgets." The older Mara nodded. "And forgetting isn't mercy, it's hunger." Behind her, something massive shifted in the dark. The pool rippled. A long, groaning note vibrated through the salt cathedral floor, like an ancient cello string plucked beneath the earth. A shape began to rise from the water. Not a creature, an absence. A void cut into the shape of a god. The sea had remembered. This had forgotten. No eyes, no face, no features. Just smooth, faceless salt, with arms made of fractured reflections. Where it stepped, light vanished. Mara stumbled back. "You are not meant to be here," it said. Its voice was her own, multiplied and hollowed. "You've seen too much. You've unknotted threads we sealed with silence." "I had to," she said, the key still tight in her hand. "I had to understand what I did, what I left behind. Understanding is not permitted here." It lifted a hand. A piece of her future reflection flaked away like ash. "You brought the shell," it said. "Give it, or be unmade." Mara looked down. The shell, still glowing, still pulsing, had returned to her palm, though she hadn't felt it. Its light flickered erratically now, pulsing like a panicked heartbeat. She stepped toward the creature. "If I give it, what happens?" "You forget," it said. "Truly, Ellie, the sea, the guilt, the memory, all erased." Mara dropped to her knees, arms over her head. Light and darkness spun around her in an endless spiral. The sea returned. Not water, but presence, rushing in to fill the space left by the forgetting. And at the center of it all, Eli. Not broken, not spectral. Whole, waiting. Mara rose slowly. Salt dust clung to her skin like ash, and the light was dim now, softer than before, flickering like candle flame beneath deep water. The void that had threatened to erase her was gone, its absence stitched closed by the sudden returning of memory. The broken mirror pools had melted into stillness, and in their place, a narrow path formed, a corridor of ribbed coral and faded bone, leading down, down, down. And Eli stood at the mouth of it. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just waited. She stepped toward him, her limbs moving without thought, as if the cathedral itself wanted her to reach him. Each footfall echoed, quiet, intimate, the sound of returning. When she reached him, she stopped. The space between them felt thick like old grief. "You're not really him," she said. He nodded. "No." "But you feel like him." Another nod. "Because you never really let me leave." His voice was quieter than she remembered. Not spectral now, just tired, like her, a perfect mirror. "I didn't know how to say goodbye," she whispered. "That's because you thought it meant letting go." She stared at him, eyes burning. "Doesn't it?" Eli tilted his head. "Sometimes. But sometimes it means carrying someone differently." The whisper returned, not from the cathedral, not from the sea, but from her, a memory she hadn't heard in years. "You said I was your anchor," she murmured, "the only thing keeping you from drifting." "You were," Eli said, "but anchors rust, and they can drown too." She looked down at the shell in her hand. It no longer glowed, its light had burned out. But it pulsed, still, rhythmic, alive, like a second heart. The corridor yawned open beside them, dark, silent. It called without sound. Eli gestured toward it. "This is the last door." "What's beyond it?" she asked. "Not forgetting," he said, "but something close." She didn't move. He reached out and touched her wrist, warm, solid, real. "I'm not asking you to let go," he said. "I'm asking you to live." Her eyes filled. "You weren't supposed to go," she said. "I did." "You weren't supposed to leave me behind." "I didn't." The salt cathedral began to shift, the walls trembling like breath held too long. The corridor darkened, the moment waned. She looked at him one last time and stepped forward. The air changed, no longer wet, no longer cold. The sun hung low over Sea Cleft, golden and warm, as if it had never dipped beneath the waterline. Mara stood on the bluff, the lighthouse behind her, casting a long shadow toward the sea. Wind tugged gently at her damp clothes, though the salt had dried, leaving faint white rings across her sleeves, like old maps etched on fabric. Below her, the beach curved gently into the horizon, familiar now, but not entirely the same. The world felt quieter, not emptier, but more still, as if something had been resolved in her absence. Mara took the footpath down the slope. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not with dread, but with meaning. She was no longer walking as someone running from memory, but as someone returning to it. When she reached the sand, she paused. Her shoes were still there, right where she'd left them the first night she heard the whisper. Untouched, dry. The newspaper fluttered beside them, the same headline etched in fading ink. "Local woman returns to the shoreline. Tide expects her." But now, in smaller type beneath, a new line had appeared. "Tide returns something too." She bent to pick it up. The wind calmed, the gulls hushed. Behind her, the ocean whispered, not words, but a sound like breath after weeping. She turned slowly, and her heart almost stopped. There, standing at the water's edge, ankle deep in the foam, was her younger self. 8, maybe 9, barefoot, wearing the red windbreaker her mother had stitched for her after the storm. The child version of Mara bent down, picked up a spiral shell, and turned it over in her hands. Then she looked up, eyes met. Recognition bloomed between them, not confusion, not fear, just understanding. "You dropped this," the child said, holding out the shell. Her voice was small, high, but certain. Mara stepped forward. Sand shifted beneath her, cool and familiar. She reached out and accepted the shell. It no longer pulsed. It no longer burned. It was just a shell now, smooth, silent, real. The child turned, walked back into the tide, and vanished. No splash, no ripple. Only footprints slowly washing away. Mara stood there for a long time, staring into the horizon. The tide rolled in, kissed her feet, and pulled away, again and again. This time, it whispered only once. Now, you are the tide. She smiled, not with joy, but with peace. She had not escaped the sea. She had become part of it. She turned back toward the town, toward the crooked little cottage with its sighing door, toward whatever came next. The shell in her hand hung. Seacliff looked different now. Not in its shape. Its buildings were still bowed inward like they'd been bracing for a storm since time began. The cafe still had 3 crooked chairs out front, and the lighthouse still leaned slightly to the left, as though whispering secrets to the sea. But the difference was in the way it saw her. Windows no longer darkened as she passed. The innkeeper, still pale and twitchy, nodded without flinching when she walked by. His too-late smile arrived right on time. The town accepted her now, not as a visitor, but as someone who had crossed the veil and returned. Not many did. She walked slowly through the streets, the shell clutched loosely in her hand. The sky above was bruised gold, and for the first time it didn't feel like the sun was drowning. It was just setting. And the whispers were quiet. They hadn't gone, but they weren't calling her anymore. They were watching. Mara made her way back to the little cottage with its weather-warped siding and fogged windows. The door creaked, but it didn't sigh. Inside, the curved walls no longer leaned inward. The house wasn't flinching anymore. Neither was she. She stood in the center of the room and opened her hand. The shell pulsed once, softly, and then cracked. A thin seam split it down the middle. Not violent, not broken. Ready. She placed it gently on the floor. From within the crack, light spilled upward, blue and faint, like moonlight under water. It expanded, slow and spectral, filling the room, not blinding, guiding. The air tasted of memory. The light shaped itself into something more, outlines of the sea, of Eli, of her younger self. But none of them spoke. They simply stood and watched. Mara stepped into the light. It passed through her like breath, and suddenly she saw everything. Every choice, every silence, every moment she'd turned away. Not just with Eli, but with herself. The things she denied, the grief she'd worn like armor, the shame she'd nurtured like a garden. The sea had whispered. The salt had shown her. The tide had taken her down, layer by layer. And now it gave her back. The light faded, leaving the room warm and real and quiet. Mara sat on the edge of the small bed, shell pieces beside her, hands empty. And yet, she had never held so much. Outside, the tide receded gently. No pull, no threat, just rhythm. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since that night on the highway, she slept without dreams. When Mara woke, the world was quiet. Not dead, not hollow, resting. Morning light filtered in through the warped window panes, catching dust motes in a slow drift. Outside, the sky had changed again. The gray that once hung like damp fabric over Seacliff was gone. In its place, a pale blue, streaked with wisps of white like brushstrokes over calm water. She rose from the bed. The shell pieces on the floor were gone. In their place lay a single feather, long, iridescent, with a shimmer like oil in sunlight. It hadn't been there before. It didn't belong to a seabird, or anything from the surface world. She picked it up, warm, vibrating slightly, as if filled with distant song. A message, a key. But this one was not for her guilt. It was for what comes next. Mara stepped outside. The streets of Seacleft were different now, though nothing had moved. People walked them. The cafe was open. A child ran past her with salt-tangled hair, laughing. No one faded into shadows, no one avoided her eyes. She passed the newsstand. The man behind it looked up. This time, he spoke. "Good morning, Mara." She paused. "You know me?" He shrugged. "We always did. We just weren't allowed to see you. Not until you came back." The newspaper headline today was different. "Tide returns all things. Woman wakes the sea." Below that, no article, just a photograph. Her, standing at the water's edge, smiling. She let the feather slip between the pages, left the paper behind, and walked towards the beach. It was low tide. The shoreline stretched out like a promise, and scattered along it were objects the ocean had once taken. A shoe, a book, a rusted pocket watch, a wedding ring in a cracked glass bottle. The sea had given them back. As she walked, she noticed them all, tiny altars of sorrow returned as gifts. She didn't touch them. They weren't hers. But farther down, near the rocks where the water met the base of the cliff, something shimmered beneath a thin veil of foam. She knelt. A photograph, preserved, untouched by time or tide. Her and Eli. He was holding a fish, grinning. She had her eyes closed, laughing, wind-blown, happy. She hadn't known that photo still existed, but the sea had kept it, and now it offered it back. Mara pressed it gently to her chest. She sat there on the rocks until the tide returned and kissed her knees. But the tide no longer asked her to come closer. It no longer whispered her name. It simply acknowledged her. Mara, not a visitor, not a trespasser. One of its own. Mara walked the shoreline until the sun dipped once more into the ocean's open mouth. But now the sunset didn't bleed. It glowed. A soft surrender instead of a violent descent. The light was warmer than she remembered, golden rather than crimson, as if the horizon itself had healed. She sat on a driftwood log, bare feet in the sand, the photo of her and Eli resting on her lap. The feather had vanished, taken back by the sea, or by whatever waited just beneath its surface. She didn't need it anymore, and yet something tugged gently at her chest. Not grief, not guilt. Completion. From the shallows, foam traced runes in the sand. Spirals, loops, shapes too old to name but too familiar to fear. And the wind carried voices again. Not whispers this time. Names. Names she'd forgotten. Names she'd once buried beneath rationalizations and sleepless nights. They drifted across the beach like a slow tide. Eli, her mother, the friend she hadn't answered, the version of herself she'd abandoned when pain felt safer than healing. The sea was giving them all back. Not to haunt, to honor. Behind her, footsteps approached. Not rushed, not hesitant, rhythmic, familiar. She turned. The girl. Her younger self, no longer alone. Behind the child came others, figures she recognized only by their echoes, her memories made flesh. Eli, smiling and whole. Her father, watching quietly from beneath a brimmed hat. Her own face, aged and peaceful, walking beside a future she hadn't lived yet. They didn't speak. They gathered around her like the tide gathers shells, gently, without ownership, only belonging. Mara stood. faced them, faced herself. "Thank you," she said, not to them, not to the sea, but to the part of her that had dared to return. They nodded, every face, and began to fade, not vanish, return, to wherever the sea kept the ones we carry too long. Only the child remained. She stepped forward, placed a shell in Mara's palm. This one was whole, smooth, light, empty. "You're ready," the girl said. Her voice was not high now, not small. It was steady. Then she turned toward the sea, and without waiting, walked into it. No splash, no pull. She became water. And the tide whispered one final time, "You have walked the memory. Now walk the world."